Now, Boris Johnson is 1 week away from giving up the premiership, and it is clear he is now battling for his legacy. And I think the one thing that Boris appears to be the most proud of now is the net zero target. Yes, it was passed into law by Mrs. May without a vote in the House of Commons, but Boris has picked it up and embraced it. Maybe his new wife had something to do with that, but he's got great enthusiasm. He wants to turn us into the Saudi Arabia of wind and other things. And Boris is pleading with his successor, for which we can guess is really, a chat directly at Liz Truss, who has talked about green subsidies, etc. And he's saying we must preserve net zero. So is it right that we stick with these targets? Is it right that we stick with Boris's agenda, or has the time come for perhaps a little rethink? Well, joining me to debate this is Tom Burke. Tom, of course, a friend of the programme, chairman of E3G and former executive director of Friends of the Earth. And Chris Morrison, environment editor at the Daily Sceptic, joins us as well. And Chris is a climate skeptic. And the first thing we'll discuss is the use of the word climate emergency. We see horrendous flooding taking place in Pakistan at the moment. We had a big drought in our country, of course, up until just a few days ago. Chris Morrison, is it right to call this a climate emergency?
Well, recently, Professor Richard Lindzen of MIT described the current climate narrative, and by that he meant the emergency, breakdown, whatever, as absurd. And he said, but trillions of dollars being paid to grant-dependent academics, agenda-driven journalists, he said, means that it's not absurd. And so is there an emergency? No, there isn't an emergency. It's an invention.
But there are these weather events, big weather events, as I say, drought conditions in much of the UK, mass flooding in Pakistan. We had nearly 30 people killed in the Midwest of America. Are these normal weather events?
Yes. They are. They're perfectly normal, and you can debunk every single one of these extreme claims. There is no scientific proof, there is no scientific paper that is yet attributed, of course we call them extreme, we used to call them bad weather, of course, a few years ago. There is no paper, there is no scientific evidence that attributes them to humans burning fossil fuel. There isn't a single, for instance, as well, a single climate paper, peer-reviewed, that proves that humans cause climate change.
Right.
It's an unproven hypothesis.
Right. Okay, thank you very much indeed. Tom, calling it an emergency, we see an alarming number of young people reportedly very concerned, angst-driven, mental health problems. Are we being a bit sort of irresponsible in using this term emergency?
Well, I don't think we're being irresponsible. I disagree with Chris. I think Chris is very brave, but frankly, if he's right, then 190 odd governments around the world are all wrong and have been completely fooled by some magic, mysterious conspiracy that's convinced everybody.
Okay, so let me come back to that. Do you think it's right and responsible to use the phrase climate emergency?
Yeah, I do think it's right.
You do think it's right?
Yeah, I do think it's right. I think we've got no time. I think to really
people
understand...
gluing themselves to roads and blocking the M25.
Look, if people choose the way they want to react to emergencies, however they choose, I'm not defending or criticising anybody. But quite simply, the real thing about this problem is it's got a time clock on it. If we get it wrong, we're in real trouble. And that is exactly what you have in an emergency. You have a limited amount of time to deal with it, and that's the situation.
How would you respond to the point Chris made that there is no actual proof?
Well, he's just wrong.
He's
just wrong. Where is the proof? What do you mean you want me to take out of my pocket?
There is a consensus of governments, and I agree with that. There is a consensus of many scientists, but not all, that man-made CO2 is contributing to global warming. I absolutely understand that. His question was, or his statement was, there's no actual proof.
Well, what constitutes proof? Proof. Tell me what you think proof is.
I would like to see a climate paper that proves beyond doubt that humans burning fossil fuel caused the climate to change.
Well, I think you should read the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate
proof.
Change.
That is a narrative. That is a narrative.
I'm sorry, it's not a narrative. It's a report by a very large group of scientists, endorsed by a very large number of governments. I don't know what else you think constitutes proof.
I mean, there is the World Climate Declaration, so there are a growing number of scientists who say we should question this.
Come on, wait, when you look at the list of the scientists who signed up to those things, turns out not very many of them are actually climate scientists, and what's more, none of the work that's been has been peer reviewed.
One fact I was given the other day, I don't know whether it's right or not, you'll tell me, that of all the carbon dioxide produced in the world every year, mankind only produces 3% of it. Is that right?
I've no idea, actually. I don't know the exact number on that.
It is right.
Well, in a sense, so what? I mean, the point is not how much carbon dioxide is around, it's what it's doing to the climate.
Well, my thought was if 97% of CO2 is being produced by volcanoes, and naturally we have no control over that. But it's a point of clarification.
Let me help you, Nigel.
Go on.
There's a cycle of carbon in the atmosphere, right? Of which plants and you and I are breathing out carbon dioxide, and there's a cycle which returns that to rocks or vegetation and so on. If you add additional, and that's in balance, and has been in balance till we started burning fossil fuels.
How do you know it's in balance?
You'll get your chance, Chris.
Sorry.
Bear with me.
So that little 3% is what tips it out of balance. And it's like anything, any gyroscope, anything, you tip it out of balance, you get some pretty catastrophic consequences.
Man has upset the balance of the world and of nature, really, is what Tom's saying.
Well, again, where is the proof? It's possible. We do increase the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere.
Yeah, we do.
But the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere is at a paleoclimatic low. It's 400 parts per million. If it went down to about 180 parts per million, life on Earth would cease because there wouldn't be enough CO2 for plant food. So, and in the past, in going back 600 million years and going back through the period, CO2 has been much, much higher. It's been 15 times higher. And we can see
there wasn't much living on the planet then.
Well, there was. No, there was. No, from about 300.
Well, I tell you what. Before we go back to what happened 600 million years ago, given the time constraints that we've got, and we've debated the emergency point. Quickly, Tom. Boris absolutely went for this. He went for net zero. He went for renewable energy. Is he right to say that legacy should be preserved?
He wasn't wrong about everything, so he was right on this thing. So absolutely right on this. That legacy should be preserved. Not much of the rest of his legacy should be preserved.
Okay, well, that's a separate point entirely. Chris, final thought to you.
Net zero.
Should we put it on hold? Should we get rid of it? What is, or is Tom right that actually this really matters and it's important?
Net zero is a disaster waiting to happen. It will have appalling consequences in the near future. We know that the power is going to start failing. One hopes it doesn't in this winter, but if it does, thousands of people will die of the cold. Most people, or a large proportion of the population, will not be able to afford to warm their house. And it is all down to net zero. It's all down to the idea that you can take out the one cheap, reliable fuel that has powered a human society for the last 100 years and given us enormous prosperity.
Which is fossil fuel.
76%.
Gentlemen, I'm going to. Now, didn't I do well there as a neutral umpire? I tried not to take sides. Really unusual. It may never happen again on this programme. But I've done my best. In a moment, we're looking at crisis after crisis, aren't we? We've got a climate crisis. We've got a cost of living crisis. We've got an NHS crisis, a crime crisis, something nobody is talking about, but that I worry for the next Prime Minister. Do we also have perhaps a sterling crisis? And what would that mean for you? All of that in a moment.